All right, it's recording.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Debate-A-Palooza 2015. It is my pleasure to introduce you to this debate on the topic that this House would repeal the classifications of the Internet as a Title II utility. On the affirmative, we will hear from Mark Chavez, Mackenzie Marquez, Megan DeBecker, and Mackenzie's going to close things out for us. On the opposition side, we'll hear from Adriana Dennis, Myra Ramirez, Ryan Field, and Adriana Dennis. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker, Mr. Mark Chavez. It's all yours.
Reaffirm, resolve, the House should repeal the classification of the Internet as a Title II utility. Advantage number 1 is innovation. A is inherency. Currently, net neutrality inhibits technological growth. Dante D. Ortiz on December 6th of last year states that while supporters of net neutrality argue that it is key to continued growth of the Internet, just the opposite is true. Fast lanes are necessary for the development of new advanced uses of the Internet, like telemedicine or driverless cars. Without guaranteed fast access Internet connection, such innovation won't come to the market. B is the link. Where net neutrality rules are repelled to the free market will promote innovation. The National Review before the passing of net neutrality states that under current free market regulations, the United States has experienced remarkable progress increasing broadband access. In 2000, there were approximately 7 million broadband lines. Now there are more than 132 million. More than 95% of U.S. households have broadband access, and approximately 63% of households currently subscribe. Market mechanisms have been successful in ensuring our access to the broadband in many areas of the country. C is the impact. Increased productivity and living standards. Enrique Martinez Garcia, a senior researcher in economics in the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, states that technological progress is the key to the country's long-term increase in its material well-being. The contributions of production such as capital or labor are only temporary. Countries such as the United States exhibit sustained labor productivity growth, while others such as Zimbabwe become impoverished. Technological progress also might hold key to understanding persistent differences in rates of improvement in the standard of living among countries. Technological progress is necessary not only to improve as a society, but also to maintain our current stature. Even though Martinez Garcia didn't really dive into the issue of national deficit, but increasing productivity will also logically help increase the amount of capital transferred and increase the likelihood of being able to repay some of the national debt. Advantage number 2 is accountability and consumer costs. A is the inherency. Net neutrality is currently in place. The Christian Science Monitor reports that after almost a year of a fierce national debate, Federal Communications voted to pass net neutrality. The 5-member commission reclassified broadband Internet access as a common carrier under Title II of the Telecommunications Act, making the Internet a regulated utility like water and electricity. As an affirmative, we agree this is a problem. B is a link. The new rules kill market competition. The Bloomberg Business stated that on the 13th of last month that unless the FCC quickly pivots away from net neutrality, the policy should become a stumbling block in the way of a true reform. From a consumer perspective, broadband Internet access of the U.S. has pretty much always been a monopoly. In the absence of competition is what makes the U.S. broadband services both slow and expensive. The lack of competition has allowed providers like Comcast and Verizon to rake in billions of dollars from consumers from what they would charge in competitive markets. Net neutrality won't fix that, because net neutrality is not ambiguous enough. C, the impact. Without competitive IPSs not being held accountable. According to Kushnick of the Huffington Post, networks are not going to be able to be open to competition. We will not have a choice of IPS, broadband provider, or cable provider. Except for the wire companies, there are no price decreases where there is no competition or regulated. We urge an affirmative vote.
Okay. Questions from the other side?
You mentioned national debt
and like all these programs to look over that?
Well, it's coming from the people paying. If we're going into it, net neutrality, you're paying more for the product, right? You're paying more because you want faster internet access or equal internet access. Well, if you have that, the government is basically controlling everything for you.
So the consumers will be paying more to be censored, to be almost censored and not to be able to go into certain websites and stuff?
I don't see how that's goes with what I'm saying.
Will a consumer be paying for the NSA to be watching over them for the new regulations? No? And how can you ensure that there will be no discrimination for people paying more than other people for certain things?
Like I
As
said,
in like certain people paying more so their internet is slower or things like that. Since the quality of the internet, of the service itself won't be improved.
well, if you're paying more, you should be doing better.
But they say that it should be white people paying. There's not going to be discrimination as well as neutrality is saying.
Well, like I said, if you don't have the money to pay, then how are you going to get it to the one? And if you're paying more, you should be able to get a faster speed.
Okay. And then hear from our negative constructive speaker.
Did you know that Comcast, the world's biggest cable and internet service provider, has over $150 billion in total assets? Today I'm going to explain to the audience why the United States should void the net neutrality proposal for the sake of the American people. The United States should void the proposal because net neutrality lessens competitions between internet service providers and companies will lose money protecting against illegal internet usage. To quote an article on Vice.com, U.S. broadband infrastructure is privately owned and operated by huge companies that often enjoy a near monopoly position in their markets. According to the FCC data as of December 2012, nearly 30% of U.S. households only had one choice for broadband provider. Because of net neutrality, because there is very limited competition between internet service providers, because of this monopolized industry, consumers are forced to stick with ISPs who are not willing or able to improve service for the sake of their customers. Because the providers know they are basically guaranteed business, they have no logical reason to improve. In regards to an article on heritage.org, certainly ISPs have the technical ability to block or impede certain services and websites, but they are hardly unique in that regard. Many firms, including Google, a longtime supporter of neutrality regulation, have similar abilities. Blocking websites or impeding disfavored services would quickly send consumers packing to another provider. In other words, government spying on consumers' internet usage bears a large burden on the economy due to the time and money spent by the NSA. The NSA works with internet service providing companies in order to intercept information between certain parties. Without net neutrality, internet service providers would have the ability to block malicious or dangerous websites directly without the time and effort of collaborating with the NSA.
Is that ready? Okay, so won't government regulation actually increase the chances that the NSA has to like see what you're doing on the internet?
Actually, no, because in the beginning, the ISPs will be able to block the malicious websites from the beginning, because with the free
Okay,
and
but
open
what's
internet,
gonna give the ISPs the incentive to do that if there's no competition? If it's government regulated, then there's no competition to keep prices down. So why would they keep the like quality up as well?
they have no incentive to. That's why I'm proposing that net neutrality actually be voided.
Okay, so you realize that the affirmative side is saying that we should repeal net neutrality, right? Okay, so the topic specifically says this House would repeal the classification of the internet as a Title II utility. Labeling it a Title II utility is what net neutrality is, and we are saying that we should get rid of net neutrality. So did anything in your case have to do with why net neutrality was good?
No.
Okay, so then why should the judge vote for the negative if you don't defend your side of the resolution?
I actually thought that we were actually arguing against the voided proposal.
Okay, so the topic says that we repeal classification of the internet as a Title II utility. It has been labeled a Title II utility, which means it is under government regulation, which is net neutrality. So that is the affirmative side.
Okay.
So do you, okay. Answer the question.
All right, next we'll hear from our negative attack speaker.
Okay, so for the affirmative side, I asked you guys about the whole money, where the money side will come from, and there doesn't seem to be a certain solution for that. In a recent study from the Heartland Institute, they stated that a recent study from New York University concluded that net neutrality would cost Americans 50,000 jobs, 500,000 jobs and $62 billion over the next 5 years. So, in conclusion, net neutrality would actually not only be losing all these jobs and money, but then again, like they said, that consumers will be paying more for that service that will not even be improved at all. So, consumers will be essentially paying for the same service without their job because they lost it. So, net neutrality would cost a big majority their jobs, and then also there isn't like it also says in the study that net neutrality regulations would likely pass on the consumer up to $55 per month in additional costs. So that goes in hand with the whole privacy settings that I had mentioned before. Net neutrality wants to tighten their regulations over privacy settings and what can be viewed on the internet. They don't want immoral or illegal content being exposed to consumers. So with that, with what I mentioned before about the NSA having to fund more programs and having to fund for people to actually be watching these consumers and what they're doing will be a much greater loss compared to just leaving an open internet as it is and keeping it that way. As I said before, it'll be $55 more for each consumer themselves to be paying to be watched over and what they're being. And also in another study, there was the whole internet traffic is also a big concern for most people. They say that ISPs have not actually done a market study for net neutrality. It obviously hasn't happened yet, so they don't know where to get the information. A lot of people are worried about internet traffic mainly because they think it'll slow down the internet it'll slow down internet compared to how slow it can get now. So all that, the affirmative side says that internet traffic that net neutrality will not affect internet traffic, but since there is no study or no evidence for that, we don't know.
Meyer, there's still questions. Still have to answer questions.
Alright, so if they're trying to stop you from doing certain things, wouldn't that be holding knowledge back and freedom of speech and stuff like that? Where we have our right to do what we want to do, not being able, you can't have the government tell you what you can do and you can't do. They can't regulate everything.
Yes, that's why I'm saying that net neutrality should not go through, because if net neutrality is passed, then all that will happen will be watched over what we're looking at.
If we're the affirmative, we're the ones saying that, this shouldn't be going through, because y'all should be defending why this is going, why it should go through.
Is that a question? This is time for questions.
Regulation, how would that really benefit us?
Regulation, how would it benefit us? It won't. That's what I just said. It won't benefit us. We'll be paying more to be with all these new regulations that will be enforced on us.
Why would you want to pay $55 extra for something you don't really need? You know, some people might not be able to afford those $55. I mean, the internet, you need the internet for everything at this point in time. It's a necessity. It's not like you might need it, you might not need it. You have to pay for it. You have to make for it.
Okay. Let's hear from our affirmative attack speaker.
Is everyone ready? So the first thing I need to point out is that they didn't actually negate the resolution. So the resolution is this House would repeal the classification of the Internet as a Title II utility. Net neutrality was advocating for it to be a Title II utility so that it would stop data throttling and stop ISPs from being able to charge companies more money if they use more bandwidth. Again, that we're saying that's bad. Companies should be able to charge other companies more money if they're using more bandwidth, because otherwise that cost is either going to go first unfairly onto the ISPs or second unfairly onto consumers. So obviously they are trying to argue the same side as us. So you remember that you have to vote affirmative because there's no negative offense in this round at all. Next, we need to talk about competition. So if we actually left net neutrality in place, there would be less competition because the internet would be regulated like something like water, where these companies aren't going to be competing with each other, so they're going to hike up prices and they won't be held accountable. That's in our second advantage. So you have to remember that accountability is important so that they don't hike up prices unfairly on the consumers, and also you have to remember that if they're not being held accountable, they're also going to have bad quality, so the internet will continue to get slower. What we need isn't net neutrality, but rather an increase in market competition when it comes to ISPs. But next, I'm going to read you something from Forbes. It says, and supporting net neutrality will hurt us in the long run because it will hurt those who can help us. Let these companies spend their money rather than taxpayer money to improve this infrastructure and bandwidth. Let them change more to the people who are willing to pay more. So we can see that people obviously have a choice in ISPs under a free market regulation. If we allow net neutrality to stay in place and we don't repeal it as a Title II utility, then that's going to decrease the innovation in our first advantage, but it's also going to decrease in quality and increase in cost. People right now have the freedom to leave a service provider if they think that they're charging them too much for what they're getting. So because they have that freedom, we should go back to a free market system. Thus, I urge a ballot and affirmation.
Questions?
Oh, yeah. I do.
Go ahead.
Okay, so are you claiming that net neutrality actually decreases competition because it allows the consumers to have a free and open right to the internet?
No. So net neutrality stops data throttling. I'm saying that that stops competition because ISPs will no longer, you can't just decide, I don't want to be with Time Warner Cable anymore, I'm going to go to Verizon. They aren't going to be competing with each other, so that's going to decrease quality and increase the price. Because I don't have a choice, if I'm stuck with someone, they know I can't leave if they decide to charge me 3 times as much as they previously were.
So whenever you reference this charging, are you referring to, oh, we're going to charge you more because you're looking at a site that we don't approve of? Or are you saying that they're going to charge more?
No, it's the internet in general. If net neutrality is in place, then that means there's no competition. It doesn't matter what you're looking at, you're still going to be charged up to 3 times as much. And we've seen this empirically through Time Warner Cable bills and studies done by Forbes.
And whenever you talk about this burden that's basically put on the taxpayers or the ISPs, what burden exactly are you referring to?
So I'm saying that if we're not under a free market regulation, then it's going to ultimately put the burden on to people who are paying for ISPs, because again, that decreases accountability. That's our second advantage. But also we have to remember that under a free market, you can pick and choose. Like if you think Time Warner is charging you too much, you can go somewhere else. That's a freedom that you have. But when it's labeled as a Title II utility like water, you don't pick and choose competitively which water company you want to go with. You're just with the one that's in your town, and whether the quality is good or not, you have to go with it. That's what labeling it as a utility does. It makes the quality decrease and the price increase.
All right.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me.
All right, now for our affirmative defense speaker.
They are actually dramatically saying that they don't know net neutrality. I'm just going to make an extension, but our first advantage was not attacked. So does net neutrality inhibit technological growth? I have an example. Today, cable, telecom, and satellite companies compete for internet customers. Today, the internet is essentially unregulated and by the federal government. President Obama is calling for the FCC to reclassify the internet as heavily regulated ISPs, as if they are the monopoly, which they are not. He's using a debate to give the FCC enormous power over internet pricing, products, and services. Commercially responsible deals won't be measured by the market. If Amazon is paying twice what eBay is paying, the FCC will only make sure the price is reasonable, not that the prices are not discriminating. The FCC is more essentially regrettable because it's wholly unnecessary. The FCC has targeted tools available to preserve an open internet, but instead choose to use the order to excuse and adopt 300 plus pages of broad and open-ended regulatory. They will have
All right, and now for our negative defense speaker.
Hi, my name is Ryan Field, and I will be defending our argument. The FCC does not have any authority. So, in a recent New York Times article, that it stated that the FCC will not get involved in pricing decisions or the engineering decisions that companies make in managing their networks. And net neutrality, there's going to be growing competition between companies because they will have more of an incentive in order to become that one company that does dominate. And so my opponents, they made the argument that it will be people will have one choice to a company to make, but there will be more incentive for companies in order to invest, in order to innovate themselves, in order to become that one company that does dominate all of the consumer income and everything like that. And there's going to be opportunities, but for existing companies like Time Warner and Comcast. That's about all I have to say in our defense. That we obviously are confused about what to say. But yes, the defense rests.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, reach your summary speakers. First on the affirmative side.
Ready? In order to crystallize the round, I would just like to remind you that again, both sides of this debate are actually giving you affirmative offense. So either way, the ballot has to be an affirmation today. But aside from that, I'm just going to build off of a few things that the negative has said. Again, they tell us that the FCC isn't going to get involved in pricing. That's absolutely right. So with the new net neutrality rules, the FCC isn't going to be controlling pricing either. So net neutrality doesn't have any benefits as opposed to what a negative side would be saying. Net neutrality does need to be repealed as a Title II utility because then it will be back into the market system and will be open to market competition. Market competition is going to increase the quality of the internet, so you're going to be getting what you want for what you're paying for, and it's also going to be decreasing the price. Aside from that, let's look back over the affirmative constructive, our first advantage of innovation, you have to remember that nothing was said about our impact of increasing productivity and living standards. So obviously increasing productivity is going to be a very good thing, because that is going to help our nation as a whole, as well as have global effects in other countries, because the more like we're able to do things, the better that is. Also, we have to remember in our second advantage that we have to hold ISPs accountable. ISPs are not being held accountable if it's labeled as a Title II utility, because again, that's like a water company. They are going to have very low and not strict standards put on them, and aside from that, nothing else is going to happen. The FCC isn't going to be regulating prices, so the prices are still going to be out the roof. And even aside from that, the internet's going to get slower because they only have to reach this bare minimum. There's no incentive for them because they're not winning and losing customers. They're getting the customers that are in their area. So without market competition, ultimately things are going to get worse than they are. We don't need net neutrality. That needs to be repealed. What needs to happen is we need to increase competition in the free market. That will solve any problems that the negative could have possibly brought up, even though that they didn't. So for all these reasons, I urge a ballot and affirmation. Oh wait, JK, there's 4 minutes, right? Sorry. So we have to remember that competition is ultimately a good thing. Aside from that, we have to look at how net neutrality does inhibit technological growth. Off of this, which is the subpoint A in our first advantage, technological growth has a lot of other benefits aside from things like the economy. We talked about spin-off technology right under the second advantage in our case. So you have to remember that spin-off technology is actually very prominent and has been empirically proven. That spin-off technology can go to things like medical attention and things like driverless cars. So we can see that obviously technological growth is absolutely necessary, especially when we talk about the senior economist at the Dallas Bank, when he tells us that it is absolutely necessary for nations to thrive. So without it, obviously we aren't going to be doing very well. So you just have to remember that the first and second advantage of the affirmative case are still standing, and attacks were made against why the negative isn't supporting the affirmative side of the resolution as well as we are, because we are both essentially going affirmative. So we just have to remember that if you want to increase productivity and living standards, we have to repeal the internet as a Title II utility. And if you want to keep ISPs accountable and you want to keep the quality up and the price down, then you are also going to have to repeal it as a Title II utility. My partner got up and read you information about how about an article that was published before the net neutrality rules were passed, which stated that free market competition was actually increasing, but passing net neutrality laws is going to obviously ultimately stop that. It's also going to stifle the opportunity of the free market later on. So if we want to be able to have a thriving and competitive free market, then it is absolutely necessary that we repeal net neutrality as a Title II utility.
Okay. Finally, our negative summary speaker.
Okay, so as the audience knows, our side claimed that the internet is not a right, and basically we had to bring up another argument that our opponent brought up, is that Obama is actually not in favor of making the internet a utility, and also there is no proof that net neutrality actually inhibits technological growth, because we actually do have driverless cars, even if it isn't a prototype, and we also do have Google Glasses and 3D chips and 3D printing and other things like that. So, which basically proves that we have net neutrality now, and net neutrality has not been actually proven to inhibit growth. It may inhibit company growth, but as far as technological innovations, no. And ISPs, we basically claim that they should not be able to have discriminatory prices, and we also agree that the FCC should not have authority to defend prices either.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes that we could ask our debaters questions or discuss this issue of net neutrality. Any questions from the floor?
So you compared it to a water utility. Water utility, the city cannot charge you extra money to receive your water quicker.
Right. So under net neutrality, there isn't going to be throttling of data. So like they're not going to be charging you like to get your water quicker or something. But there's also not a lot of competition, so the quality can be really bad. They're going to have
Well, net
like
neutrality is proposing that all the quality is the same.
right. But they're also proposing, they're not proposing like caps on pricing or anything like that. So, like hypothetically, Time Warner Cable can charge you 3 times what you were paying previously, as long as they can somehow label it as reasonable, and that's the only like regulation that's being put on them for the same quality you were getting before. Also, with less competition, it's